Do you still remember the clear ring of a bicycle bell on a sunny summer afternoon? Do you remember the name Schwinn shimmering on a sturdy steel frame? Back then, it was the ultimate symbol of the American dream, a child's golden ticket to freedom. But today, those massive factories are nothing more than silent, concrete blocks in the heart of Mississippi. How did an empire that once controlled a quarter of the U.S. market collapse under the weight of its own glorious past? Join me as we journey back in time to witness the rise and fall of the Schwinn family. Ignaz's dream and the era of precision machines, 1895 to 1920s. It all began on April 1st, 1860, in Hardheim, Baden, Germany, when Ignaz M. Schwinn was born. He was the second of 7 children. His father, Frank Schwinn, was a master carpenter who left behind a masterpiece, a pump organ that can still be played today. From his father's workshop, young Ignaz inherited a deep love for detail, precision, and the mindset of a true craftsman. Tragedy struck when his father passed away when Ignaz was only 11, but he soon found his own path, becoming a machinist apprentice before traveling across Germany to learn about the latest tech craze, the bicycle. Imagine a passionate young man watching those high-wheelers, also known as ordinaries, which were popular but incredibly dangerous. One pedal stroke equaled one wheel rotation, meaning the bigger the front wheel, the faster the bike. But it also meant the rider could easily flip over the front. Ignaz knew the future didn't belong to those giant wheels. He was drawn to James Starley's revolutionary design, the safety bicycle. With a smaller front wheel and a chain system, it looked just like the bikes we ride today. In his spare time, Ignaz tinkered with and improved this concept until he was confident enough to show his designs to Henrik Kleyer. Together, they built Germany's first safety bikes. However, a disagreement over the coaster brake design led Ignaz to leave his home behind and head for the land of promise, the United States. Chicago, the heart of chaos and opportunity. In 1891, Ignaz and his wife Helen arrived in Chicago. At the time, Chicago was the bicycle capital of America, booming with people and industry. More than 300 bicycle manufacturers were operating there, producing 2/3 of all bikes in the U.S. Even while working for different companies, Ignaz's artisan soul was restless. He needed room for his boundless creativity. The turning point came in 1894 when he met Adolf Frederick William Arnold. Arnold was a wealthy German investor from the meatpacking industry and president of the Haymarket Produce Bank. Arnold had the capital and Ignaz had the master engineering skills, a perfect match of money and technical brilliance. On July 14, 1895, Arnold Schwinn & Company was officially born. To make a mark, Ignaz held a contest to name the new line of bikes. 4 dealers suggested the name World. Ignaz loved the sense of strength, longevity, and prestige the name carried. He gave each winner $100 in cash, a huge sum back then. These World bikes weren't cheaply assembled just to chase a trend. They were built on machines Ignaz himself specified, with heavy-duty frames, precise welds, and scientifically sound geometry, staying sharp in a monopoly craze. By the late 1890s, the American bicycle market was saturated. Sales plummeted starting in 1900. By 1905, the market was only 25% of what it had been at its peak. Hundreds of companies went bankrupt. Out of 300 manufacturers in Chicago, only 12 survived. Schwinn was one of them. During this storm, a giant entity called the American Bicycle Company, ABC, appeared. This was a trust trying to corner the market by buying out small builders to control prices and kill competition. They knocked on Schwinn's door with a lucrative offer: cash and guaranteed contracts. Most people would have said yes in a heartbeat, but not Ignaz. He saw through the fake financial numbers and the fragile structure of the corporation. With Arnold's support, he firmly refused. It was a life-or-death decision. Just 3 years later, in 1903, the ABC Trust collapsed, dragging all its member companies into bankruptcy. Schwinn stood tall, independent, and stronger than ever. Not only did he survive, but Ignaz also became a hunter. He bought up bankrupt factories for pennies on the dollar, But he wasn't after the buildings. He wanted the best machinery, the technical tools, and the precious patents. For instance, he bought March Davis in 1899 just to build a larger, more efficient factory. A one-man empire and multimedia ambitions. In 1908, Ignaz made another decisive move. He bought out his partner, Adolf Arnold. After 13 years of partnership, Schwinn was now his empire alone. No more compromises, no more divided visions. However, he also realized that adult bicycles were being threatened by the rise of cars and motorcycles. Staying still meant death, so Ignaz chose to diversify. In 1911, he acquired the Excelsior Motor Manufacturing and Supply Company. A year later, the Excelsior Model X set a speed record of 100 miles per hour, putting Schwinn on the map of speed. In 1914, he built the world's largest motorcycle factory and went on to buy the struggling Henderson Company in 1917. This combination created the Excelsior Henderson brand, which quickly rose to become the third largest in the US, trailing only Harley-Davidson and Indian. While motorcycles brought glory and excitement, bicycles remained the core foundation. By 1914, Schwinn controlled more than 25% of the US bicycle market. 1 out of every 4 bikes on American streets bore his name. The Schwinn brand was more than just a name. It was a symbol of reliability. A durable investment that could be passed down through generations, surviving even the most enthusiastic destruction from kids. During this time, his son, Frank W. Schwinn, known as F.W., joined the company after graduating as an engineer from the Illinois Institute of Technology. Unlike other heirs, F.W. grew up on the factory floor. He understood every sound the machines made and exactly what the dealers needed. This succession promised a solid future for the Schwinn family, even as the dark clouds of the Great Depression began to loom on the horizon. In your memory, what was the brand of the very first bicycle you ever owned? Please share its name in the comments so we can reminisce together. A life or death bet during the Great Depression, 1930s to 1940s. In October 1929, the financial earthquake hit. Decades of American wealth evaporated in just weeks. Ignaz Schwinn, then in his 70s, watched his personal fortune and the company's value drop rapidly. But unlike many panicked businessmen, he knew this wasn't a temporary dip. It was a true economic disaster. In American garages, those Excelsior Henderson motorcycles, Schwinn's pride, now became luxury items no one could afford when there wasn't enough food on the table. In 1931, Ignaz made a decision that is still seen as both ruthless and brilliant in business history. He called his motorcycle leadership team together and announced he was shutting down the entire division immediately. Imagine the shock in that room. Excelsior Henderson had a full order book. They were the 3rd largest motorcycle maker in America, and most importantly, they were still profitable. Engineers protested and managers argued, but Ignaz remained cold. He understood that motorcycles were discretionary spending, and in a depression, luxury dies first. He chose to sacrifice the glittering empire to save the essential foundation, the bicycle. Bicycles were cheap transportation for workers and a livelihood for newsboys. They were the only lifeboat left. The balloon tire revolution and the rise of F.W. Schwinn. As Ignaz stepped back toward retirement, his son, Frank W. Schwinn, took over with a powerful spirit of innovation. In the early 1930s, after a research trip to Germany, F.W. saw bicycles with wide tires gliding smoothly over steep, cobbled streets. Back in Chicago, he realized American bikes were dull, flimsy, poorly welded, and lacking personality. He convinced the American Rubber Company to produce a tire 2.125 inches wide, a balloon tire never before seen on a bicycle. In 1933, Schwinn launched the B10E motorbike. It was essentially a bicycle that looked like a miniature motorcycle. It had a fake gas tank, a shimmering chrome headlight, and a ringing bell. However, the first version was very heavy to pedal. F.W. didn't give up. He refined the design, and in 1934 he released the Aerocycle with an aerodynamic frame, streamlined fenders, and a premium leather seat. This was the beginning of the legendary cruiser, or paperboy bike, the very thing that defined American childhood during the Depression. While the rest of the country was collapsing, Schwinn was innovating. Their sales increased 20-fold in the 1930s thanks to these built-like-a-tank, but stylish bikes. Paramount, the king of the track, and American pride. F.W. Schwinn didn't just want to dominate the kids' market, he wanted to prove American engineering on the world stage. After seeing adults in England and France use bicycles for professional sports, he decided to create an ultimate line. In 1938, he partnered with famed racing mechanic Emil Waston to create the Paramount series. Paramount bikes weren't mass-produced. They were handcrafted in a separate area of the Chicago factory, using lightweight chrome moly alloy steel and exquisite brass brazing. FW knew Paramount might not make a huge profit, but it was a symbol of the superior quality found in every other bike bearing the Schwinn name. To prove their strength, Schwinn sponsored athlete Alfred Letourneur. On May 17, 1941, in Bakersfield, California, Letourneur reached an incredible 108.92 miles per hour on a Schwinn Paramount while drafting a lead car. This set a world record and etched the name Schwinn into the chronicles of speed. The challenge of World War II, when the bike factory went to war. Just as momentum was building, World War II broke out, forcing every American manufacturer to pause their civilian dreams. Schwinn, despite its German immigrant roots, showed fierce patriotism by being one of the first companies to volunteer for military production. From 1942, the lines that once made bike frames were now casting artillery shells, radar frames, machine gun mounts, and cockpit parts for airplanes. Schwinn even developed a 30-pound folding bicycle for paratroopers to carry when jumping into enemy territory, though the military later found it wasn't very practical for combat. A truly touching detail from this era was the change in the workforce. As the men of Schwinn left for the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific, it was the grandmothers, mothers, wives, and sisters who stepped onto the factory floor. This Schwinn version of Rosie the Riveter kept the machines humming, maintaining the life of the company through those fiery years. Exclusive distribution and Hollywood glamour. After 1946, as soldiers returned and the baby boom began, consumer demand exploded. F.W. Schwinn noticed a fatal flaw in the traditional way of doing business, selling wholesale to department stores like Sears or J.C. Penney. There, his bikes were given the store's private label, turning a high-tech product into a nameless, price-squeezed commodity. He made a second giant bet. He completely ended sales through major retail channels. Schwinn built a network of independent bicycle dealers, IBDs, where each shop was given territorial protection and direct support from the factory. In return, these dealers could only sell Schwinn bikes and had to follow the strictest service standards. This ensured that when a parent walked into a bike shop, the answer they got was always, "You need a Schwinn." To boost their image, Schwinn launched a bold marketing campaign by putting Hollywood stars on their posters. In the 1946 catalog, legends like Bob Hope, Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, and Bing Crosby were seen smiling on shimmering Schwinn bikes. The bicycle was no longer just a toy. It became part of a luxurious, durable, and free American lifestyle. If this video touched your heart or brought back a memory, please tap Hype and help us share these stories with more people who still remember. Thank you so much. The Golden Era and the Stingray Explosion, 1950s to 1960s. While dominating the kids' market, Schwinn began to feel a new breeze from Europe. English racers. These bikes were lighter, faster, and equipped with 3-speed hubs or more, making them attractive to adults who wanted to exercise in the suburbs. Initially, Schwinn reacted by creating heavier mid-range bikes to maintain their identity of durability. However, the peak of this era was the birth of the Varsity in 1960. Though mocked by professional racers as the heaviest lightweight bike ever built, historically, the Varsity was America's most important bicycle. It was designed with unique technology to be affordable yet durable enough for riders to feel the joy of cycling. By 1987, the adult bike market in the U.S. grew from less than 1% to over 60%, and the Varsity was the foundation of that revolution. With nearly 2 million units sold, it became the best-selling derailleur-equipped bike of all time. The Varsity was the tool that helped adult Americans rediscover the joy of two wheels. The Stingray, the blast that defined a generation. But if you had to pick one single icon representing Schwinn's absolute power, it would definitely be the Stingray. In 1962, R&D director Al Fritz took a field trip to Southern California. He saw kids doing something strange. They were chopping up old bikes, putting on small wheels, high-reaching ape-hanger handlebars, and long banana seats to mimic the custom chopper motorcycles of their older brothers. Fritz immediately realized this wasn't just a fad, it was a new generation expressing itself. He rushed back to Chicago and proposed mass-producing this model under the name Project J38. At first, Schwinn leadership laughed at the idea, saying the design looked ridiculous and no parent would buy it for their child. But Fritz didn't give up. He convinced F.W. Schwinn to do a limited test run at dealers in June 1963. The result was an earthquake. American kids went crazy for the Stingray. Between 1963 and 1968, Schwinn sold nearly 2 million Stingrays, making it the best-selling model in company history, surpassing all previous cruisers or lightweights. The Stingray became a cultural icon. If you grew up in middle-class America in the 60s, you either owned one or wanted one with all your heart. Schwinn quickly pushed this excitement to the limit. In 1965, they launched the Fastback with slick rear tires inspired by drag racing. In 1966, they added frame-mounted shifters like the trendy muscle cars. And the peak was the Crate series in 1968, with vibrant names like Orange Crate, Apple Crate, Lemon Peeler, and Gray Ghost. These bikes featured front disc brakes, spring fork suspension, and glossy paint. Even though they cost twice as much as a standard Stingray, Schwinn still sold about 150,000 crates every year. This was Schwinn at the height of its power, when design, manufacturing, and marketing ran like a perfect machine. Frank Valentine Schwinn and the First Cracks. In 1963, Frank W. Schwinn passed away, leaving a massive legacy to his son, Frank Valentine Schwinn. At this point, Schwinn seemed unbeatable, but it was during these most brilliant years that the seeds of decline were sown. The company was too confident in its heavy steel designs and ignored the trend of lightweight racing bikes from Japan and Europe. While competitors began using new alloys, TIG welding, and sleek frames, Schwinn's Chicago factory was still using machinery and methods from the 1930s. The Paramount line, once the pride of pro racers, began to fall behind due to a lack of modernization. By the late 70s, even the Paramount was overtaken by a new generation of custom bike builders both inside and outside the US. In the late 60s, Schwinn also faced legal issues when the Justice Department sued them for antitrust practices. In 1967, the Supreme Court ruled that Schwinn violated trade laws by preventing distributors from shipping to unauthorized dealers. Although the ruling was later overturned, Schwinn had to spend millions building regional warehouses to legalize their distribution, just as foreign competition was heating up. Did you ever own or dream of having a Stingray with a banana seat, or the legendary 10-speed Varsity? Leave a yes or no in the comments so I can know. Cracks in the foundation and strategic blunders, 1970s to 1980s. In the early 1970s, a deep cultural shift swept across America. Bicycles weren't just toys for kids anymore. Jogging became a national obsession, gyms popped up everywhere, and adults started looking for bikes for fitness or commuting. Suddenly, the adult bike market, which was less than 1% before, exploded to over 60% by the late 80s. However, while customers craved lightweight, sleek 10-speed racers from Europe and Japan, Schwinn stuck to the old formula. They released the Varsity and Continental in response. Historically, the Varsity was incredibly important because its low price and amazing durability introduced millions of Americans to cycling. But to true enthusiasts, it was a paradox: the heaviest lightweight bike ever built. While brands like Peugeot, Nishiki, or Fuji used new steel alloys and precision welding, the Varsity was still made of heavy steel using an outdated electro-forging method from the 1930s. Schwinn made the mistake of marketing heavy bikes with kickstands, something pros had long discarded, to a market that was becoming increasingly sophisticated. Customers wanted sports cars, but Schwinn gave them tanks. Their loyalty to the old machinery in Chicago caused Schwinn to lose breath in the very first meters of the technology race. The BMX and mountain bike nightmare, when the pioneer becomes the latecomer. Schwinn's greatest tragedy wasn't a lack of ideas, but a lack of belief in what they saw. In the mid-70s in Southern California, kids started taking their Stingrays to dirt lots to race and do stunts, giving birth to BMX. Initially, Schwinn leadership called it a dangerous sport, just a fad, and refused to join in. It was only after newcomers took over the market that they released the Scrambler and Predator, but they were too heavy compared to true BMX standards. Even more ironic is the story of the mountain bike. Pioneers like Gary Fisher and Joe Breeze created the first mountain bikes by modifying old Schwinn frames from the 1930s, those built like a tank clunker bikes. When they brought the idea to Schwinn engineers, the response was laughter. Who would ever want to ride a bike into the mud? That arrogance caused Schwinn to miss the biggest revolution in modern cycling. While Specialized launched the first mass-produced stump jumper in 1981, Schwinn was still messing around with patchwork models like the King Sting. They entered the game 7 years later than their rivals, a gap wide enough to turn an empire into a follower. The 1980 strike and the collapse of the American soul. The cracks weren't just in the design, they were in the very heart of the empire, labor relations. In October 1979, Edward Schwinn Jr., the fourth generation of the family, took over as president. Ed was a nice man but lacked the decisiveness of his grandfather F.W. and the technical obsession of his great-grandfather Ignaz. He prioritized boardroom deals over fixing the stagnation on the factory floor. In late 1980, dissatisfaction among Chicago workers exploded due to high inflation and worsening conditions in an 80-year-old leaky factory. A massive 13-week strike broke out, with 1,400 workers walking off the job. This wasn't just a wage dispute, it was a total breakdown of the trust that had bound the Schwinn family to their craftsmen for generations. Instead of modernizing the Chicago factory, which they had refused to do in 1978, leadership made a fateful decision. They sought salvation in the East. The giant trap. When the teacher trains the usurper. Paralyzed by the strike and cost pressures, Schwinn began outsourcing production. First, it was Panasonic in Japan, but as the yen rose, they turned to Taiwan, where a young company called Giant Manufacturing was hungry for opportunity. In 1981, Schwinn made what would later be seen as its biggest strategic blunder. They sent their best engineers, most sophisticated designs, and modern machinery to Taiwan to teach Giant how to make high-quality bicycles. Edward Schwinn Jr. believed Giant would always be a loyal supplier, a cheap henchman for his empire. But he was wrong. Giant was a brilliant student. They didn't just build bikes for Schwinn, they absorbed every bit of American tech, management processes, and quality culture. By 1984, Giant was producing 700,000 bikes a year for Schwinn. When Schwinn tried and failed to buy a stake in Giant, Giant launched its own brand, selling bikes identical to Schwinn's but 15% cheaper right in the US and European markets. The teacher had accidentally handed the weapon to the enemy, and now bikes with the Giant name began pushing Schwinn off the very showroom floors they once dominated. The Greenville disaster and the soulless years, in an attempt to reclaim the Made in USA label and escape the Chicago unions, Schwinn made one last bet in Greenville, Mississippi in 1981. They built a new factory there, but it was a logistical disaster from day one. The factory was isolated 60 miles from the nearest train station and far from the West Coast ports where parts from Asia arrived. Logistics became a nightmare. People joked it was easier to get from Chicago to Taiwan than to Greenville. Worse yet, they couldn't find a workforce with the same high skill level as the craftsmen in Chicago. The Greenville factory never made a single dime of profit in its 10 years of operation. By this point, Schwinn was no longer a real manufacturer. They were just a marketing company, slapping their name on frames made by rivals overseas. Experienced managers who understood the market were pushed out or left to join rising rivals like Trek or Specialized, They took decades of knowledge and passion with them to help competitors take down their old company. The painful fall and the vanishing of an empire, 1990s to 2001. Entering the 1990s, the Schwinn family stood on a financial precipice they never could have imagined. In the Chicago headquarters, managers lived in denial. They couldn't believe the most famous name in American cycling couldn't sustain itself as a viable business. By the late 80s, profits from traditional bicycles had almost completely evaporated. The company's only life jacket was exercise bikes, especially the Airdyne series, which had high profit margins. Schwinn once held a near-total monopoly there, but tragedy struck when their old rival Sears launched a similar model for much less. As a result, Airdyne sales dropped 35%, costing Schwinn $8 million in profits, money that could have saved the empire. In the early 90s, the company lost $2.9 million while carrying a massive debt of $80 million. Edward Schwinn Jr. made a fateful miscalculation when dealing with creditors. Ed believed the banks wouldn't dare let the company go bankrupt for fear of losing their equity, so he took a hardline stance, refusing to offer a realistic recovery plan. However, family pride backfired when the bank started playing financial hardball, moving the loans to debt recovery departments to squeeze whatever was left from the Schwinn name. The death of American manufacturing, the pain of Greenville. While the finances were in danger, the last hope for the Made in USA label also faded. The Greenville, Mississippi factory, built in 1981 to escape Chicago unions and restore domestic manufacturing prestige, had become a black hole for money. On October 4th, 1991, a worker quietly finished the last bike of the day, turned off the lights, and locked his station. There was no celebration, no farewell speech. After 96 years, Schwinn officially stopped making bicycles in the United States. Closing Greenville didn't just clear the balance sheet, it transformed Schwinn from a true builder into a marketer, slapping their brand on products made entirely overseas. Do you ever feel a sense of loss when a brand from your childhood suddenly disappears or changes completely? Please share those feelings in the comments below. The 1992 bankruptcy and the grave dancer. The collapse was inevitable. In October 1992, Edward Schwinn Jr. was forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It was a shocking moment. An icon of the American dream, a company that once held 25% of the market, had collapsed under the weight of debt and stagnation. At this point, venture capitalists began to circle the corpse of the empire. The Zell/Chilmark Fund, led by Sam Zell, nicknamed the Grave Dancer for his specialty in buying distressed companies for cheap, jumped in. After tense negotiations in smoke-filled rooms, Zell/Chilmark bought Schwinn in 1993 for about $40 to $43 million. The Schwinn family received a pittance after nearly 100 years of sweat and tears. Immediately, the new owners carried out a purge. The entire old staff in Chicago was deemed unfit, and headquarters was moved to Boulder, Colorado to start a rejuvenation. The name Schwinn lived on the frames, but the bloodline and historical connection to the founding family were severed forever. The final soul in Waterford precision cycles. In the ruins of the bankruptcy, one small flame of pure passion remained. Richard Schwinn, great-grandson of Ignaz, along with partner Mark Muller, bought the high-end Paramount production shop in Waterford, Wisconsin, from Zell/Chilmark in 1993. However, due to the bankruptcy deal, Richard wasn't allowed to use his own last name as a brand name, nor did he have the rights to the Paramount label. He founded Waterford Precision Cycles, continuing to hand-build exquisite steel frames for customers who loved beauty. While the mass-market Schwinn brand was losing its identity on supermarket shelves, Richard quietly preserved the family's traditional craftsmanship, serving pro racers and collectors until he officially closed the doors in June 2023. In a world of constant innovation, history and pride are sometimes the biggest obstacles. Schwinn rose to the top thanks to Ignaz's boldness, but they fell because of complacency and a lack of resolve against the tsunamis of technology and globalization. The family bloodline in the bicycle industry finally stopped when Richard Schwinn retired at age 69, closing a long day that lasted over 130 years. But even though the empire has vanished, the name Schwinn will be forever etched in the hearts of millions of Americans. Those old rusty bikes in the garage or the Stingrays being auctioned for thousands of dollars still tell the story of a time when we believed that anything made by the hands and minds of a master machinist could last forever. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. If you love these nostalgic stories, don't forget to subscribe to the Back to Yesterday channel so we can meet again by the fireplace on more peaceful evenings. Wishing you a good night's sleep and always cherish your beautiful memories.